All right, this is Blake with DZone Live, the resilience episode. It's a good timing this week. There were some outages you may have heard about. I'm Blake from DZone. I'm on the road this week, heading out to KubeCon LA next week. So not in my familiar office setting, so it's kind of a makeshift for today. Let me run through the agenda. Through the KubeCon. So there's KubeCon that's going down next week. We got an after party on Wednesday night. If you're going to be there, if you want to get interviewed, reach out to us. Our agenda for today, we've got an exciting lineup. So up first, we're going to have Colton Andrus, the CEO and co-founder of Gremlin. And then after that, we're going to have Zach Morris, the CSO and co-founder of Kintaba. And then rounding it out, we have Ted Young, who is the Director of Developer Education at Lightstep and the co-founder of the Open Telemetry Project. And then after Ted talks, we're going to do a live Q&A with our guest today. And so that is the agenda. So let me bring up to stage our first speaker, Colton. Hey, Colton, how's it going?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great today. So for people not familiar with you and Gremlin, if you could say a little bit about yourself and the company.
Sure. Myself, engineer by trade, grew up working at a couple of small companies, Amazon and Netflix in particular, where I was on the teams in charge of making sure the platforms and the services were up and available. Part of that involved the call leader programs, the incident management, and building tooling and evangelizing a process when we started it that didn't have a name. It was just working on reliability, but is now known as chaos engineering. And about 5 years ago, I met with some of my smart peers from those environments, and we went and started a company, Gremlin, to go help folks tackle these difficult reliability challenges in distributed system environments. And so what happens when a dependency fails? What happens when you lose a zone or a region? What happens when DNS goes down? Being able to answer those questions up front gives you a lot more understanding of your risk and your profile and how your system will withstand those outages.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. You know, we're talking like the week of outages. I've got family members asking about outages. Everybody's like, what's going on with outages? How can this even be possible? So resilience seems like a very timely theme today.
I mean, resilience is always timely right after an outage. The problem is folks need to remember that it's important ahead of time. It's not purely a reactive, oh my gosh, this just occurred, what do we do next? There are a lot of little things we can do, a lot of low-hanging fruit that help us minimize the impact or prevent it altogether.
Yeah, definitely. And then speaking of resilience, and then with Gremlin, so Gremlin offers systematic resiliency testing framework for microservices. So turn failure into resilience with chaos engineering. So for companies out there looking to, basically get better at this, how can Gremlin help them?
Yeah, so one, our team has a lot of expertise as practitioners that have built and operated these systems, but we've also built a platform that gives you all the building blocks to go recreate past outages, to prepare for potential situations, to build these scenarios. And we've done it in a way that's safe. There's undo buttons and ways to revert things if things go wrong. Secure. It's important that you run these things in a safe way, especially as you move into production environments. And simple to use. It's a new concept still for many folks, and knowing how to apply it well and how to interpret the results takes some expertise and some guidance. And we're doing our best to make our product augment existing engineering teams and make that as easy as possible.
Great. And for those not familiar with chaos engineering, I get some questions about that because it's you've got kind of marketers with kind of the buzzword meaning of it, but from the technical side, how would you explain chaos engineering?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is the name is a little bit of a misnomer. It's not always about causing chaos. Yes, Chaos Monkey went around and randomly rebooted hosts, and that was a way to help people understand what was occurring. But really what we're here to do is we're here to do distributed system testing and verification. We're here to cause the types of failures that would occur in a safe way and see the impact. And so let me give you an example. Let's take, I depend on Facebook's platform, for example. What would happen to my business if Facebook's platform went down? Well, I can wait for a Facebook outage, or I can have my engineering teams go run an experiment with Gremlin that black holes traffic that drops traffic to Facebook on a limited number of my hosts, probably in a staging or a test environment. And that allows me to understand, hey, what happens to my system? What are the workarounds or the ways we could gracefully degrade? How do we alert on this? How do we know when this is occurring? And we can go through and answer those questions so that, one, if it occurs, we're prepared, we understand, we know. And two, if possible, we've gracefully degraded or we've worked around it so that our customers aren't impacted by that issue.
Yeah, it's great. And with, we're kind of in this COVID world with more teams remote and companies also at the same time with more teams sort of being distributed around the world, different time zones. There's a huge rush to deploy and operate even faster. So it basically means that, if you're not operational and resilient, more things can go wrong. So your resilience and software architecture is also going to be even more critical. So how would you say for companies to really, maybe 3 steps to integrate that operational resilience into their efforts, maybe at the sort of a company looking to get into it, and then also from the point of view a company that might be doing it but maybe hasn't met about it in a year or something, and it's like, hey, what are our unknown unknowns? Are we doing this right or wrong?
Yeah, so you first of all, you hit on a great point there. Does our software behave the way we expect, and do our teams know how to respond, and are we training our teams? And this is, as someone who's been on call for 10 years on these types of systems, I have a bit of a soapbox here. We want our teams to have an opportunity to practice and to prepare, to train while the light, during the day, while things are going normally, so that when it happens at 2 a.m, they're ready. And so, number one, you can go out and run a game day using chaos engineering or Gremlin. Let's go cause a failure, but let's cause it in a very controlled, safe way. And let's test that somebody gets alerted, that their engagement works, that they have access to that system, that they know where the dashboards are, that they can interpret the logs. There's a ton of value in going through that process and making sure your teams have that muscle memory so that when things go wrong, they're ready. It's the fire drill. There's a reason we've all participated in a fire drill, and that's because if something goes wrong, we don't want people to panic. We want them to be very thoughtful and methodical, not to make things worse. I think technically, what can organizations do? There's one thing I think every team should do, and it's you should know about each of your dependencies, and you should know what happens if one of your dependencies fails. That can be your internal identity service or your internal database that you rely on. It can be a third party. It can be an Amazon service that you rely on, or a Google or an Azure one. But understanding your dependencies really maps to the risk you have as a service and a risk to your availability. And then testing those, walking through those, and understanding, hey, is this a critical dependency? Do we think it's a critical dependency, and is it actually a critical dependency? And then should it be? And through those experiments, you can have those discussions, make those calls, and where possible, simplify the system so it gracefully degrades or there's less critical touch points. Honestly, that was the work we did at Netflix that moved us from 3 nines to 4 nines of availability. We cut our on-call burden by a tenth by going through and testing the critical dependencies and making sure that they failed well and gracefully degraded. Once you get that done, you should look at redundancy. Obviously, anyone should be able to lose a host, and Chaos Monkey is kind of a base case. That's easy. Can you lose a zone? Can you lose a region? Can you lose a data center? When I was at Netflix, they began by, day-long exercises to fail out of regions. And by the time I left, it was a 5-minute automated script that could be run on a moment's notice. And that's really the future of the business continuity disaster recovery world, is not a hypothetical S1 plan about what you might do if things go wrong. It's going to be weekly and bi-monthly exercises that are showing that you can lose that, that you have that redundancy and that recovery capability.
Great. And then 2 more questions for you. So one, we're kind of at that time of the year now that we're in Q4 where everyone starts to say, hey, Colton, what are the trends you're seeing in 2022? So if you put on your sort of future hat, what do you see as kind of some of the big trends kind of in our software space and also with resiliency?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm excited to see is a recognition and an investment in reliability. A couple of years back, it was move quick, break things. People will forgive you. Let's just run. And I think when the world moved to online and everybody had to interact with their customers and their customer base through that mechanism, they realized customers are much less patient. If you control their bank, their internet, their travel, their health, their safety, their livelihoods, they're going to have a high expectation. One of my favorite jokes is, in 1999, it was okay to download something, for 5 minutes off the internet. It's okay for a web page to take 10 seconds to load. Customers today just have much higher expectations. And I think we're going to see that continue. Beyond that, I think it's the other social one is the balance between remote work and in-person work. And we as a company have always been remote by default, with people spread across the country and the world. And so it's interesting. What the biggest impact to our team was the inability to have our offsite events. Those are really the ways in which we kept the team together and kept them aligned. And when we went through a year where really no one could travel and no one could spend time with each other, you saw that drift. And Slack and Zoom, as we all well know, just only get you so far. And so, I'm not one that wants everyone back in the office or is going to mandate that. And I like the flexibility that we have with that. But we've been getting our team together in thoughtful, safe ways. And that's going to be the trend for me is finding that happy medium between, an everyday office and no one talking other than Zoom and Slack for a year.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Definitely some great points. So it's as we sort of get technology is exciting and big, and it's weird for people when they see these like big giant behemoth of companies have outages, things like that. So if you're watching today, definitely make sure to check out Gremlin. Do not let outages happen to you. Also look at the efficiencies that Gremlin can help for your company. And last question for you, Colton, and I kind of almost have been racing past this, but we do get people that watch this that could be in middle school, grade school. They're like, hey, software seems really interesting, but I don't even know like where to start. So for our next generation of developers and software engineers and professionals, what would be like one or two tips you would say to them for our next generation?
I have several children of my own. I have some middle school and high school aged sons and daughters, and they love tech. And so, number one, the things that we do can be simplified and explained. I think that's a valuable skill. Speaking in analogies, we talk a lot about chaos engineering in terms of the vaccine analogy. Hey, we're going to inject a little bit of harm in order to test and build a response and an immunity so that we're protected down the road. And similarly with the fire drills, teaching people about how to be safe. And so even though what we do in the field may be more complicated, more technical, there's still great lessons and elements we can pull out. I think we combine that with, you want kids to be able to get their hands dirty. You want to be able to get them hands on keyboard, and whether it's a Minecraft mod or something in a game they love, or a lot of Python in a web browser, getting tic-tac-toe to work, spending that time to help them play with it and get familiar with it, break through that initial wall of intimidation. Because I think that's the biggest, stopping point is people don't know where to start. They don't know where to begin. Funny enough, we're talking about middle schoolers, but it applies to technologists and scale. We have this problem with Gremlin. Folks aren't sure where to begin. Folks aren't sure what to do. It's a scary and daunting problem, and having someone to walk you through it and guide you and help make sure you don't make any stupid mistakes and that things go the way you want, that you're definitely, it's a positive outcome, and you're mitigating any negative impacts, really helps people experiment and get in that mindset. And so that's what I would say is like, get them experimenting, get them thinking, get them hypothesizing, and then let them go try it out and see what the answer is.
Wow, that's excellent advice, Colton. It was an honor to have you on today. Anything else you want to note while we have you on?
Always happy to help out the community or engineers or children that want to learn coding. I think that's part of our mantra in a startup and in a software company is, hey, we learn these lessons at some of these larger companies. We know some of the pain that folks are going through. How can we help out? We can help out through good software. We can help out by building a good team. And then as people, we can help out by looking for opportunities to educate or uplift each other. So that's what I'm here to help do.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks for being on, Colton, and we'll have you back during the Q&A with all our guests. But it was really great to learn about Gremlin and get your insights as well.
Thank you very much.
All right, up next, we've got a surprise edition. We've got our very own Kellett Atkinson, the director of product at DZone, who was just featured on a Dev Interrupted podcast, who's going to be interviewing and talking to Zach Morris on resiliency from Kintaba. So let me bring them both up to stage, and I will take a quick pause.
Zach.
Hi, Kellett.
Hey.
It's nice to talk to you today.
Yeah, same here. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
So to get started, so we've never met. I'd love to know a little bit about you and Kintaba, and just let me know. Kind of give us a little. Background.
I mean, of course, I'm Zach Morris. I'm a software engineer as well as sometimes InfoSec practitioner. I'm currently based up here in Montreal, Quebec. Previous to my current startup, I actually ran the mobile security team at Uber. And before that, I worked security at Facebook. And also before that, the internal tools team at Facebook, which is actually kind of where the idea for Kintaba came from. At the internal tools team at Facebook, one of the things we worked on was a tool for handling severe incidents, for defining the process and tooling that the company as a whole used to define, to respond to outages and things like that. As myself and my co-founders came out of Facebook, we realized that that tool set wasn't something that really existed for the greater engineering and DevOps communities, and Kintaba is kind of an attempt to build that robust tooling for the rest of the world, so to speak.
So tell us a little bit about Kintaba then. So it's obviously for incident response. Sounds like, from what I could tell, it does a lot of automation, kind of helping to kind of like keep people aware of what's going on, trigger the right response, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So the biggest issue we've seen, and this came out in part of of issues we as a startup experienced early on working on a previous product, is the way incidents and outages are responded to by a lot of organizations is very ad hoc and done in a way that both makes the process of doing the response and learning from the response difficult. Something happens and people scramble to set up an ephemeral Slack channel and start writing things down in a Google Doc or set up a Zoom meeting, and everything afterwards gets lost. Nobody has access to, the knowledge that could have been gleaned from what happened. And the next time a similar thing happens, they can't, go back and see how things were addressed. Kintaba is kind of an attempt to define processes for everybody. My co-founders and I, for a long time, have worked on the idea, if you need a process, build a tool. And Kintaba is kind of an attempt to do that. We're trying to build something that works with the things people are already used to, because a big issue is if a tool is too complex, especially during an incident, people will avoid using it. A lot of tools that are provided to quote unquote make things easier end up making things more difficult. Kintaba tries to both, provide a repository to capture information and do things like automations or integrations with other tools people are using, like Slack and Jira, et cetera, but do it in a way that doesn't add headaches, doesn't make it such that okay, I need to respond to this incident, but I've got to go do these 3 things before I can actually start going to figure out what the root cause is. And the hope is, Catawba becomes a way for companies to start to learn from their outages, becomes a way for companies to, have a defined method for approaching incidents, as well as a knowledge repository for companies such that when things break in the future, they can go back and figure out how things happened in the past and not have to have history repeat itself over and over.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you, with the customers you're working with, do you find that there's any consistency with how they approach incidents, or is it different from every customer's perspective? And then it sounds like the tool is trying to kind of impose a framework that helps them approach it.
Yeah, so imposing a framework is maybe not the right word so much as providing.
Okay. Better choice of words.
Yeah. So we looking at the customers, the people that use our product currently, there are a lot of different ways that people use it. Like we, integrate with Slack, and, chat, for instance, works both in Catawba and Slack and syncs back and forth. But a lot of our customers prefer to do most of their incident response inside Slack as opposed to inside our interface. And while we want to be able to capture the conversation and history of what happened during an incident, we don't want to go to somebody and say, okay, that means you can't use Slack, for instance, you got to go chat in Catawba. And so we have a very robust chat interface inside Catawba, but we also have a very robust interface to Catawba inside Slack. So you meet people where they are. Yeah, we aren't necessarily imposing a specific framework for how to respond to an incident, so much as providing a methodology for a company to define a process that works best for them.
Got it. Okay.
And we have some opinionated beliefs about how incidents should be handled, things like creating a blameless culture and the importance of postmortems for building knowledge in the future and learning from incidents in order to prevent future ones from occurring. But the actual tooling and steps that a specific company uses to create that kind of culture is not something we want to enforce on somebody.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's an enabling tool, not a. Yeah. I totally get that. Yeah. So poor choice of words, but I get it. Like you're trying to provide a framework they can use, or at least like the foundation of one they can use to make their incident response more consistent and more predictable, and take away learnings from their incident responses.
Yeah, exactly. Having a process for incident response is the important problem we're trying to solve. And we're trying to provide a method for creating that process and culture, not necessarily telling people specifically how to go about doing that process.
And how did you get interested in this type of engineering work?
So part of it comes from my experience in InfoSec. I've never worked on an actual incident response team in the security field, but I have worked with tooling that was tied in to incident response, in particular internal tooling at Facebook on the security team. And I always found it, like, I think this space, the incident response space for operations and development, is growing now. But early on, I found it very interesting that incident response in security was so much more of a well-defined field. And it seemed confusing to me because I don't think security, despite the fact that it's often treated as a separate field from operations or development, I don't feel like it really is. And I feel like the tools that existed for, tracking down what was the root cause for a security incident, what were the, reasons this occurred and how can we prevent this from occurring in the future is one of those things that has existed forever in security, but should also exist for these other areas, because the same method of thinking about problems applies to the rest of engineering.
Right, like decomposing the problem, understanding the root cause, all that stuff.
Yeah, and learning about it and applying it to the future.
So, and when you say in other areas, you mean like areas like performance or like revenue operations or anything like that.
And anything where you could describe something as being a black swan event. Anything where something negative happens that you don't want to happen again can be treated as this, root cause analysis and attempt to learn. And that way of thinking really needs to be expanded. Right now we're largely focused on engineering, but I actually do agree. I think there are plenty of plenty of places you could apply that similar kind of resilience thinking outside of engineering, handling, retail problems or finance or legal issues, et cetera, et cetera.
Totally. And with your background being from Facebook and an incident response, how did the news of Facebook big outage this week, what was your kind of like, what was going through your head when that happened?
Well, I was joking earlier with the other guests before we started this that I think it's really funny whenever a large, an outage at a very large company of that scale happens, because all of the rest of us in the tech community end up getting no work done that day because we all stop working so we can go gossip on Slack or Discord and try to guess what the heck happened and, what's going on inside the company, which I find really hilarious. I appreciated a lot, like I said, Kantaba, maybe right this second, it's not the best thing to say that a lot of our ideas came out of Facebook, but I actually, because people, see that outage, they're like, oh no, maybe we shouldn't take Facebook's approach. But I actually think that's the wrong way to think about it, because if you look at how Facebook responded, like they released a postmortem of what occurred very, very quickly. Like they had a very high level one, and then a few hours later, a much more technical one. And I will also point out that the postmortems, neither of them threw anyone under the bus. Like they never said this was caused by some engineer on some team. They did not blame somebody. They documented it as a technical problem, a process issue, as opposed to somebody's fault. And I think that's a very interesting takeaway. And I think it demonstrates that despite the fact that, yes, Facebook had a problem, but we all have problems. Incidents occur. Things break. Code is written by humans, regardless of if we want to never have problems in the future, that's impossible. And so I think the lesson from this outage is that even huge companies that pay engineers tons and tons of money have problems. And the way they respond to those outages when they occur is with maturity and a learning mindset that is blameless towards the people, but focused on solving the process and technical issues, is a lesson that all companies could probably take to heart.
And do you find that a lot of the companies that you work with are still on kind of that journey towards a blameless culture and like being objective, or are companies pretty good at adopting that approach?
I think when you start to explain to companies why they should be following these approaches, I think they start to understand. Like there's always been a focus on metrics in incident response, in minimizing the, trying to get the number of incidents occur as low as possible. And when you go to somebody that works on an engineering team, that manages an engineering team or is an IC on an engineering team, and you explain to them, the issue with thinking about things in that way is it results in people not reporting things.
Yep.
If people are blamed for problems or judged based on how low the number of incidents their team has, they won't mention things early on. They won't report the Sev 3. It will wait, and it won't get reported until the entire site is out and it's a Sev 0 or Sev 1. And when you explain, like, the way to think about resilience isn't with regard to minimizing the number of incidents that occur, but focused on in some ways maybe incentivizing the actual reporting of incidents, maybe for a while wanting the number of incidents to go up, but focused instead on minimizing the severity of the things that happen and trying to glean the most information out of those incidents when they occur. Focusing on that in the long term actually results in you as a company becoming more resilient and becoming better and more efficient and effective at responding to those big problems in the first place.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That completely that tracks for sure. So I think we're kind of running up on time. So I want to give you one last chance to give anybody who's watching kind of a next step when it comes to learning about Kantaba or learning more about incidents response. So what parting words do you have for people watching this?
So there's a very good reason I am not the CEO, and it's because I'm bad at doing the selling side of things.
That's okay.
Because my approach on a lot of this has been very philosophical, and I'm really interested in solving the larger issues in our community. So, of course, everybody should go to kantaba.com and check out our product. I think we have the best approach to handling incident response, and I think as a team we are very, very open to discussing the problem as a whole. Yep. And working with people that want to solve this problem, as opposed to us just telling people how to do it. Like we are opinionated, but the way we are opinionated involves learning ourselves. Beyond that, I would say, to anybody listening, as a company, you should think about how you're handling your incidents and think about what your culture says. I think, the industry as a whole is a lot, there are a lot more jobs than there are engineers right now, and engineers are able to be picky. I think engineers as a whole are also starting to choose places that respect them as people and recognize that, blaming them for outages is not something they want to do and can choose not to have to deal with. And so I think, leaders at companies should think about, are we handling incidents in a way that makes us better in the future? Are we handling incidents in a way that values our engineers and incentivizes them to actually solve problems and make our products better, as opposed to just try to get the numbers down when the review cycle comes around next?
Right. And I think that's a pretty engineering mindset too, like being focused on the problem, solving the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
So for anyone listening, if they want to connect with you personally to talk about this anymore, what's the best way to do that?
I mean, I'm on Twitter at Prozac with 0. You can find me there. Obviously, my email is probably very easy to guess. Like most founders, Zach at Kantaba. Feel free to chat with me there. I am really happy to talk about anything in this space or the InfoSec space or tech as general. I think we're all probably really missing conversation after the last 2 years of self-imposed, or I guess world-imposed isolation. So yeah. like all of us, I really hope to have more opportunities to talk with people.
Well, on that note, I'm super glad we got a chance to talk today. And
yeah, thanks, Kellen. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, same here. And now we will go back to Blake Blake, you there? He may be checked out. Oh, there he is.
All right, I'm back here. How's it going? Sorry.
All good.
All right. So up next, so we've got me, Kellett, and our next guest is Ted Young. He is the Director of Developer Education at Lightstep. And I love on Lightstep, it says, because monitoring and observability are better together. And if that wasn't enough, Ted is also the co-founder of the Open Telemetry Project. Welcome, Ted.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, super excited to have you here.
Very cool. So for our DZone audience, if you want to tell people a little bit about yourself, your company Lightstep, and then about your Open Telemetry project.
Sure. Yeah. So I work at Lightstep. I've been there since nearly the beginning. And we are an observability company. I think what differentiates us is from the get-go, we've been focused on taking all the different kinds of observability data out there and trying to integrate them into a single kind of graph of knowledge that we analyze. So that's what attracted me to Lightstep. What attracted me to the observability space and the Open Telemetry project was prior to Lightstep, I did a lot of distributed systems engineering, working on container scheduling, some lower level things like that. For that, it was a lot of like social movement tools for environmental organizations and people like that. And before that, it was visual effects and gaming and things like that. And so all throughout my career, I've been trying to apply computers to solving problems for people. And the entire time, there's been this question that has plagued me, which is, why is it slow? Why is it slow? And this was always the most pernicious of problems, because when it's just not working, that's bad. But usually there's at least a starting point to pick up the trail. The thing that's on fire or exploding usually is kind of raising its hand. But when something is just slow, untenably slow to the point that it's impacting business value, it's impacting deadlines, it's impacting users, that is much more pernicious to actually sort out both how that is affecting people and what the root cause of it might be. And so I started researching tooling and theory behind how do you actually like track down these kinds of issues. And that led me to become a big fan of distributed tracing. And that made me start to think, well, distributed tracing is such a fundamental tool. It's actually a data structure that you can use to then tie everything else together. How could we actually go about popularizing this so that all the services people are using and running are actually have distributed tracing enabled and are participating? Because actually getting distributed tracing stuff up and running is kind of like the hard part with those systems traditionally. And so that led to first the Open Tracing project and then the Open Telemetry project, which is where I am today.
Yeah, that's awesome. So taking a step back, what can you, for people that are listening, can you tell us the difference between observability and monitoring? I know we.
Oh man, so I'm kind of a curmudgeon. I'm like the person you'll ask, and I'm like, there is no difference. Marketing, and like to a certain degree, I think it's true. Like observability is, in order for observability and monitoring to mean different things, I think you have to subtly redefine monitoring along the way, because you roll it back to the turn of the century when, we were running LAMP stacks and monitoring them with, Munin and Nagios and Syslog and like all the stuff back then. It wasn't like we were really doing anything that different. It wasn't really that different. And we tended to call all of that monitoring. But I think the space has become complex enough that it's helpful to kind of break these systems down into like component parts. And when you do that, it becomes helpful to start to say that, okay, monitoring is how you are actually looking at telemetry data and engaging in the first stage of analysis, which is what is the live health of my system, and then being able to like set alerts and understanding what's in or out of bounds, right? So there's some more fundamental questions you might ask of like, what does it mean for my system to be healthy? Like SLOs are a popular term, service level objectives, being able to be like, well, what does healthy actually mean? I'm going to sit down and actually describe what the operating parameters of my system is, like for each component, and what are the operating parameters of my system as a whole, and actually like really put some thought into the structure of my deployments, and what does acceptable load mean? How do I know that this is acceptable load for this system? Well, I got to test it. And so once you start doing all of that, well, now the part where you're just monitoring the live system, that's only a portion of what you're doing now, because you're actually doing a lot more work up front to then be able to say like, well, when I'm monitoring this is an anomaly. This is inbound. This is out of bounds in terms of operational parameters. And so I think that's where the term observability started to show up, to talk more like holistically about all these other things we should be doing.
So the difference there is like just passive kind of data collection and consumption versus maybe context setting and being able to understand, apply context to the data you're getting.
Yeah, I would say part of it is I would say pulling out a concept called telemetry as its own concept, because this is something that was usually, all this stuff was just kind of glued together. So you have telemetry, which is the production and transmission of these of signals to observe your system. So the data you're using to observe your system. There's the system design, where you're thinking up front about what your expectations are, what your invariants are, what you believe constitutes your system running well, and what do you believe constitutes your system not running well. Not just like basic things like, is like the server up or down, but also things like, business value and stuff of that nature. And then there's monitoring, which is, okay, I'm ingesting this telemetry data and I'm having a look at a live view of my current system. So actually being able to like see the system that's out there. There's my servers. They're doing this. Here's the traffic. Actually being able to see that, that's monitoring. And then now there's stuff past monitoring, which I would call analysis, like deeper analysis, which is actually not just live observations, but your computer being able to actually show you correlations and giving you deeper insights into, for example, long-term trends, shifts in how your system was operating, and being able to do some of that analysis for you.
Or even predicting maybe where performance might lag or something like that.
Yeah. And then there's also root cause analysis and, firefighting and like all of these other things, which are kind of like represent this sort of loop that you're doing, where you're monitoring your system, you're seeing there's something wrong, you're trying to develop a hypothesis for what might be the cause, and then you're trying to go out there and gather data to verify whether your hypothesis is correct.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So for people listening that may, like, I would assume most people probably do have some form of monitoring in place at this point, but
I would hope so.
for people that are maybe at the beginning of their observability journey, where they're kind of taking the monitoring and doing more advanced things like benchmarking and setting context around their data, like what does that, what advice do you have for them to kind of go the next level from just being kind of passive monitoring to actually using the data?
Yeah. So I would say there's a couple good steps if you're kind of starting greenfield and starting anew. One is to set up open telemetry. Make sure that your all of your services are actually set up properly with open telemetry. In particular, open telemetry's tracing system, which is the stable portion of open telemetry today, but it's also the foundation upon which everything else is going to be built. Make sure you get that in early. And as you're building your system out, you're ensuring that every new service that comes online is participating in that tracing system. It's important to get that just foundation in there sooner rather than later, because that's what's producing the data you're going to need to do some of these deeper investigations.
Right. So you design with that in mind, is what you're saying. If you're designing from scratch or whatever, you design with that in mind.
Yeah. Really just make sure you've got open telemetry and distributed tracing working properly, kind of learn a little bit about what distributed tracing actually is, and how context propagation works. So you have just kind of like a baseline of understanding of how this tool works. It's a little weird. I think even a lot of engineers who've been doing, operators who've been monitoring things for a long time, they're used to just free floating logs and metrics. They may not actually be familiar with distributed tracing, which to me is actually just like logging structured the way you want, so that you're not losing your mind trying to find all your logs. That's you'll hear all this stuff about, it's like performance analysis. Yeah. To me, it's like, no, it's just logging with the structure that you need. So when you find one log, you can see the rest of the logs, which is this like pain point that we put up with as operators. But it's like, it's just, we've been putting up with this pain for so long. We've just normalized it. It's like, of course it's impossible to like find all the logs that I want quickly when my system gets large. So learning about distributed tracing and working that into your toolkit, I think, is a really good starting point. And then having a look at tools like Lightstep that actually take that data in and getting an understanding of what they can do for you, how they can automate some of this. That's also helpful. So you just are growing and expanding an awareness of like what kind of tools are actually out there. And then also defining what correct operations are for your system. What does it mean for your system to be healthy? What does it mean for it to be operating within parameters? How much traffic are you expecting your system not just to handle, but to like be getting? And that's where I would say learning about SLOs and other tools that organizations use to define the business value that these services are providing, and being able to like quantify that business value in some way that you can work that into your monitoring. So you're not just monitoring like RAM, CPU, like requests. Like, can you actually like start creating dashboards and setting up tools that actually bake in those concepts of what the objectives are for each of these.
Oh, that's
these
interesting.
Systems. Yeah.
So even like at some level, it may tell you how much business risk you're being exposed to when performance drops or whatever, or you get some spike in traffic and all your systems go down or something.
Yeah. It's possible to have very like basic objectives, like we should be able, we should only be dropping some percentage of requests and things like that. There should be like an error budget. Like there should only be, only 0.1% of requests should be have an error involved. Otherwise, like something is up. so error budgets, you can have these kind of general purpose things, but yeah, actually digging into like on a higher level, why are we even building any of this stuff? Like, what is the point of any of this software? And trying to figure out from an operational perspective, what does it mean for these systems to be providing value? Those kinds of objectives and indicators, once you set those up, that really helps orient you when things start going wrong. Yep. And even when things aren't going wrong, it's helpful because now you're also thinking about like the value your system is producing. And it makes it easier to talk not just about, when things go wrong, here's how they went wrong, but when things are going right, being like, this is things going right. Like, look, you can see these trends. And you can actually see we deployed this change here and we saw that these services started fulfilling their objectives better in some way. We're providing more value by adding features. Just trying to get all of that integrated into the organization, that kind of thinking, I think is really helpful.
Sounds like a big lift for some orgs.
If this is where I think, starting from the beginning helps. You can always attach this stuff later because it's not like your systems are producing no value and like no one has any clue why they built anything. Like, this stuff is like innate and latent. But just like testing, if you have a service that was written without tests, and then later you're like, all right, we're having problems, so I'm going to go wrap a test harness around this thing. It's like, well, we didn't really build it to be testable, and so you can find that that's actually just a thornier issue. And I think observability is in the same boat. If you can always try to inject some kind of observability into these systems after the fact, but if you just start with that, it's just, who knows what you're going to find, right? Like if you just start with that, if right from the get-go, you start with like, all right, I'm going to have distributed tracing working. I'm going to have at least some rudimentary objectives for this service. You don't have to get everything perfect, but just having that thinking in mind in the beginning, and then verifying that you can kind of create that loop. That I think is very helpful. So for the people who are starting anew, really think about trying to integrate those tools like OpenTelemetry and then like this kind of objective-oriented thinking into your practices.
Awesome. And for you, I'm assuming your interest in your experience in this came from hands-on experience, but like if somebody's watching now and they want to learn more about distributed tracing, or they want to learn more about observability or building systems with observability in mind, do you have any resources you might recommend to people that you use, or that are kind of like, good resources that you'd recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I would say go check out OpenTelemetry at OpenTelemetry.io. I do think a lot of our documentation there needs work. The project tracing is stable, but we're just putting the finishing touches on metrics and logs right now. So I think in 2022, you're going to see OpenTelemetry really kind of like hit the ground. But in the meantime, I post a lot of content on Lightstep's YouTube channel. So if you go there, we post just, there's obviously stuff about how our product works there. Even if you don't use Lightstep, I think learning how some of our tools work might help you. But you'll also see we do post a lot of video content around SLOs and this kind of thinking. And if you go and have a look at playlists, you'll see some OpenTelemetry playlists. You'll see my stuff posted there a lot. And I tend to talk about the OpenTelemetry observability side of the fence. So I've got a lot of feedback that people find a lot of those talks really enlightening, especially if you're just getting into the space for the first time. So that's where I point people.
That's perfect. That's awesome. That's exactly what I was looking for. And we are publishing an application performance trend report towards the end of the year. I think there's some coverage of open telemetry in there.
Nice.
And yeah, I'd love to after this, connect, and maybe that's something that you could advise us on, or you could participate in.
Yeah, absolutely. Be totally interested in that.
Awesome, cool. Blake, did we cover all your questions? I don't know if there were any questions that you wanted to ask. I didn't mean to
Oh no worries. no worries. It's exciting. If there's anything you want to mention on the change intelligence, I know you just launched that in February, and like the big thing now that everybody asked us is, what are the trends you're seeing around resiliency, everything that's going on in software? So any trends that, not the ones we could, that are buzzwords, but what are some of the stuff beyond just that you're excited about as we start to look into 2022?
Yeah, I think those two things are related. So to understand I'll start with change intelligence and then explain how I think things are going to get a lot better in 2022 with open telemetry. So what change intelligence is it's a automated analysis tool that focuses on finding correlations. So I want to be clear, you're probably going to start hearing a lot of stuff around like AI ops and like all of this stuff. And computers are never going to like find the problem for you and be like, this is your root cause. And also I wrote a patch for you and have fun. Like it's not, I don't believe it's ever going to quite get like that, because defining like what is a root cause, what is a problem, those are very subjective forms of analysis and decision making, and computers, machine learning as we know it is just not really good at subjective decision making. But if your data is structured well enough, then correlations, not causation, but correlations, that is a very objective form of analysis. This latency you care about over here correlates highly with messages that go through Kafka node 6. This increase in errors that you saw in this time frame correlates highly with this new version of your application that you deployed. So being able to find these correlations, if your data is well structured, then you can actually apply computers to automate that analysis. And what we have to do today is do all of that work in our heads. So when operators are they're monitoring their system and then they see a problem. So we're now moving past monitoring, where it's like, I have observed a problem now and I need to get to the bottom of it. That sort of treasure hunt, the first thing operators want to do is figure out, well, what else correlated with this problem? So I see the problem, and if the solution is not just right there, sitting right next to the problem, I have to start looking somewhere else. And if you have to do all of that work in your head, piecing all of this data together while kind of manually searching around in a bunch of different tools, that is very slow and painful. And it's a huge cognitive load on the operator, especially as these systems get larger and larger and more complex. The chances that the operator who's first responding to this knows all of the little details about all the different parts of the system get lower and lower, because it's just a bigger system. And even when humans do have like a strong understanding of their system, our abilities to our intuition and our inference abilities are like surprisingly weak. Sometimes it's obvious, but problems are almost by definition unexpected, and we're often getting surprised by what the real problem actually was. So if a computer can assist you with that first part of just finding those correlations together and saying like, well, if you are interested in this change here, just what else correlates with that change? I don't know if it's caused by this or even related, but here's the things that correlate highly. That's a huge time saver. And change intelligence is an example of a tool that does exactly that, where you can just look at a dashboard and say, this stuff right here, tell me what correlates with the changes that I'm seeing here. And then it will give you a big readout of all the different kinds of correlations that it might find. Correlations between deployments that you've made, correlations in other metrics, correlations in change in resource contention, what kind of things were happening concurrently on those same computer nodes. So that's what change intelligence does. And for 2022 moving forwards, what I think is going to get better is having better data. So tools like change intelligence can work best when the data is well structured and actually integrated into a single graph. When that data is siloed, if it's siloed enough so that one tool doesn't have all the data, well, then obviously it can't analyze data it doesn't have. But if it has that data, but that data is disjoint, it's all disconnected, then those tools are kind of forced to guess. And that guessing limits their accuracy. So these tools work best when all of your data is integrated into a single graph. And that is actually one of the big points of the OpenTelemetry project. Traditionally, you've had like logs and metrics and tracing as these like three totally separate systems. But with OpenTelemetry, we're integrating that into one system. And once metrics and logs are complete, which will happen by the end of the year, I think people are going to start to realize one of the big benefits there is how this data is getting cross-correlated. So one example are metrics exemplars. So you're making metrics. So you're, say, measuring, HTTP status codes on an endpoint, and you're starting to see 500 errors. Well, you would want to know, like, what are these transactions that are causing these 500s? And normally that would then be like, well, I'm going to switch over into my logging tool and just kind of hunt around maybe for some 500 logs or something and try to piece it together. But with OpenTelemetry, whenever you're actually counting a metric or triggering a metric, if there's if your transaction is being traced with the tracing system, a number of those traces are being attached to those metrics as exemplars. So actually at the data level, that's getting tied together. So now these tools don't have to guess like, well, maybe this 500 error log that I'm seeing was related to this metric over here. No, it's actually definitive. This is a sampling of transactions that were literally happening when these metrics were emitted. So I think once people start to get used to that, and once a lot of these services people are using, not just their applications, but services like Nginx and Kafka and hosted services like the kind of stuff that Amazon and Google and Microsoft provide. Once all of those systems start participating in tracing and producing OpenTelemetry data as well, that's going to then further broaden the view that these kinds of analysis tools have. So I think that's what's coming in 2022. And once operators realize that they can move quickly and they don't have to think about these correlations, they can just see them and then move straight on to the next step of proposing hypotheses and verifying them. That speed boost, I think, is going to change how we approach operations and observing our system. So that's my prediction.
Sounds awesome. Yeah. It sounds like it cuts out a lot of the stuff that is probably really muddy, unglorious work for.
Oh my God. Yeah. The terrible parts of observability and operations are just gluing all of this stuff together.
Yeah.
Trying to scale grep to some giant level it was never designed to scale to.
Yep. Like well, that's awesome. I think that's super insightful, and those are, I think, things that people watching can hopefully be excited about, because it fundamentally will change the nature of their job in a positive way.
Yeah, so that's my hope. Yeah.
So that's awesome. So I think we're at time here, but I really want to thank you. This has been an awesome conversation. I've learned a ton already. Like this is as a non-developer, is super interesting to just hear kind of like firsthand, what are the cool things happening, particularly in these spaces that we see a lot on DZone people talking about. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
All right, moving along, we'll jump into the Q&A. So we'll bring back anyone else that is around. Very exciting day today. So I'll bring back Zach and Colton. Let me get us to our big panel here. Boom. Yeah, so pretty exciting today. Just want to note, like on DZone, you can go now and edit your profile, put in some cool stuff. We'll be at KubeCon next week. Shout out to Colton, to Zach, to Ted for joining us today. First question I'll throw out there today. We'll see if the audience has any. So are all of y'all like super familiar with DZone? Has DZone helped y'all in any way? Are we doing anything that you like?
So I personally was not familiar with DZone before you all approached me, and I actually went and started looking at it. And I have not had a chance to go through all of them, but I actually really liked these DZone lives a lot. I watched a few of them in preparation, and then I watched a few of them simply because I liked them. I appreciate anything that lets me see people that work in this industry like people, I guess, in more off the cuff and ways that let me, really see what they think about things. That's not, completely run through, the flashy, make things look good for the website kind of stuff. I think that's a really nice service you're bringing to us as a group.
You just got me curious. I just went and looked, and DZone has been in my emails for the last 4 years. We've had opportunities to sit together and chat and talk. So it's been good to see the growth and the partnership along the way. There's a lot of good content there.
And Ted, I think Lightstep has traditionally been a partner of ours.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I've definitely posted a number of OpenTelemetry tutorials on DZone. So people just go to DZone and search for OpenTelemetry. I bet you can find a lot of good content there as well.
Awesome. Blake disappeared on us. Let's see if we have any questions in the chat over here.
Are you preparing for the movie also, Blake? That's why I was rereading Dune.
I was we're actually twins today, so I'm still in chapter 1.
Yeah, I bought it to reread it before the movie.
And I don't recommend on that one to do the audio version. It's there's so much you have to go back, and it's got its own words and other stuff. So.
Yeah. Sorry, completely off topic, Blake and I, but
if you look at it, if you see in Zach's background, he has the same Dune book. So
yeah, same copy of Dune. So
and it comes out next week, and the whole world will maybe shut down and get back to a movie theater if we're lucky. Will any of you be out at KubeCon next week, or any other kind of big events where people can catch you at?
I'll be at KubeCon. Yeah. People can catch me on Twitter. I'm at TedSuo. If you're coming to KubeCon and want to talk observability, definitely hit me up.
Blake and I will be there. We'll see you there.
Sweet.
Yeah, I don't think I will be at KubeCon, but my co-founder, John, I believe, will be.
Sweet.
Yeah, our team will be there. I'm going to be at reInvent. That's my big social expenditure for the fall. That's what I'm currently planning.
Yeah, I'm excited to be able to go to conferences again. I have a sweater on, but under the sweater I have my DEF CON is canceled t-shirt from last year because DEF CON got canceled. So I'm excited to start actually seeing people in person and seeing talks and hallway con again.
Are there events that any of you are looking forward to over the next 6 to 12 months?
Re-event, right? That's got to be a big one, right?
winter
Which
holidays.
Events, real events in person where you travel and it feels normal and you get to talk to people and you get to do all the things you haven't done. Like, I think like many folks waiting for that all clear, waiting for the smoke to clear so we can do it the way that we know we've done it in the past. And if we got to dip our toes in or mitigate, in the interim, we will. But I think most folks just want to have that original conference experience back, the hallway track, getting drinks or dinner with folks. It's funny. My first year or two at some big conferences, I went to a lot of talks. I took a lot of notes. I was very studious. Subsequent years, it was who I went there to see, not, the talks are interesting, the content's interesting, but really it's the social interaction and the things that you don't plan that occur and that come out of those that are where the magic happens.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned hallway con. There's been a few conferences I've gone to where it'll be 3 days and I'll go to like 2 talks in total, and it'll be the most productive weekend of my entire year, simply because of the conversations I'll have with people in the hallway or over dinner or parties and things like that.
Yeah, I miss meetups.
Yeah.
The Open Telemetry project hasn't really been able to do meetups for ever. And that's just like a bummer. So I'm really looking towards starting a bunch of Open Telemetry meetups once it's safe to do so.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. We're actually launching virtual meetups on DZone soon. We're in the process of doing that. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Awesome.
Blake and I are working hard to get that off the ground. So hopefully in beginning of 2022, we'll start to have a way for at least, since DZone's audience is global, it's not easy to do kind of like local meetups. Although obviously that's an awesome way to go, is meeting with people locally and getting like that mini conference kind of feel. But we're looking forward to being able to host some virtual ones.
DZone's based in North Carolina, right? Cool. I grew up in North Carolina. That's why.
Oh wow. Okay. Cool.
One of the things.
Which part of North Carolina?
He's unplugged. There he is.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it was one of the things I saw that made me very excited about DZone. Is anything out of the triangle makes me happy.
And which part of North Carolina?
I grew up in Durham and then Chapel Hill.
Nice.
I moved to California when I was 16, but Chapel Hill is still home.
Sweet. Not Carborough?
No, not Carborough. My brother still lives in Durham. It's wild because Durham is completely different than it was when I was a kid. Like, it's exciting and like you want to be downtown, and
you don't have to wear a Kevlar vest. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great down there. I actually live downtown Durham, but it's like there's 10 buildings being built right like within a block of me, so it's nuts.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a big time. And one sort of interesting thing a lot of people ask me about is like, Blake, with developers and software professionals, how's it that trade shows and in-person is so big when largely everybody seems so introverted? It always seems like so strange to them, like how we love to get out and, the in-person events and talking and networking is such a big part. But at the same time, there's this other juxtaposition that everybody's like introverts that hates talking to people.
Well, it feels like it's different when you're talking about the thing you love.
Right.
Like, that's the thing. It's like, I was real nervous about doing this because I hate talking, but then it start talking about, tech and DevOps and like handling incidents and the philosophy behind it and approaches for it. And it's like, oh yeah, I actually love this stuff. Any chance to ramble on the stuff I do all day is completely different.
Totally. Also, go ahead.
One of the things I was told, which I like, is that whether or not you enjoy being around people is not whether or not you're an introvert or not. It's whether or not that energizes you or that drains you. And so, look, I think we all crave and need that social interaction, that validation, that opportunity to hear and to learn. The thing is, like, I think a lot of geeks, and I'm a self-described geek here, we save up for that. We'll go to the big conference, we'll do that week or that weekend, and we'll go out and we'll have a lot of fun. And then we're going to go home for the next week and just, be locked in our basement in front of our computer while we recharge, while we get back to where we need to be.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's also easier when you're going to be around a bunch of other introverts, I think, because there's like a, you can relate.
Yeah, well, people forgive you when you do the run out of things to say and say, okay, I'm going to go over here now.
Yeah.
In that situation, because we all feel the same way.
Yeah.
On that note, I think we should wrap up here, Blake. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds good. Any parting thoughts? Anybody has anything else you're excited about upcoming? Can be anything. It's like it could be something like a cool vacation spot in Italy, or is there anything that you're excited about that we didn't cover today?
I think we all agree Dune is going to be really exciting.
Yeah, I mean that's going to be big.
I
I'm
love
excited going to movies again.
Hopefully, Dune's amazing. It's out internationally, so I've heard it's good. The Matrix trailer was amazing.
Looks
I can't
awesome.
wait for that. And it's been like the week of video games. I don't know how geeky y'all are, but Amazon hit it out of the park with their new world. It's fun to play. The new Metroid comes out. I'm playing the old Super Metroid from 1994, so I'm stoked to have a new one to play with my kids. In fact, I need to go download that right now.
Yeah,
today's launch day.
Honestly, with COVID slowly, hopefully, God willing, winding down, I'm excited to have a little bit more of the balance in the work-life balance. I love what I do every day, but yeah, video games, movies, seeing people again. That whole side of things, I think, will be nice, and hopefully will happen in the future soon.
Agreed.
And anything from you, Ted?
I think nothing that we haven't covered. Yeah, I'm just excited to hopefully things kind of start to get back to normal to the point that we can all just start hanging out in person. I really miss meeting up with my local geeks. And I miss going to movies. So
yeah,
that's going to be really fun.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for being on. I think this is our best episode yet of DZone Live. We had no dress rehearsals and other stuff. It's obviously a crazy time for us with KubeCon coming on, but I think sometimes like you can over-engineer and over-plan, and it doesn't always attribute to success. And then there's other times where just like you hit lightning in a bottle, and just with Colton, Ted, and Zach, just amazing speakers. I definitely see a bright future if you're not already out speaking in the industry, connecting with others. Just really some brilliant, great voices. I know me and Kellett really enjoyed it from my side. Kellett, feel free to take us out with any parting thoughts as our fearless leader on DZone.
No, I just thank you guys for your time and sharing your knowledge and being a part of the conversation and just in this way part of the community. So really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really, really enjoyed this.
Yeah, glad to have you.
It was great. Thank you much.
All right, Thanks everyone. Have a great
rest. We'll see you in LA.
Yeah, see everybody in LA that's there. If not, we'll see you at meetups or some trade show in person, or maybe we'll be sitting next to each other in IMAX watching Dune. So wherever you are, can't wait for things to hopefully keep getting back closer to more of the normal that we used to love. So this is out for our DZone Live Resilience episode.